Oh, hey, didn't see you there. Just been engaging in some light reading. Let's make some tortillas because my tortillas are really damn good. So I will link to the recipe. Thank you to Stephanie Anderson for all her work on it. It is spot on. We're gonna start with 3 cups of flour. I've tried it with both bleached and unbleached, and I think the bleached flour works better. I'm not much of a baker, but Leslie has convinced me that measuring is the way to go. So 3 cups of flour is 15 ounces. And if you're just gonna measure with a cup, then make sure to dump it in with a spoon instead of scooping it because that compacts it, and then level it off. If you use too much flour, your tortillas are gonna come out kind of dry and cracky, and that happened to me the first couple of times. So remember, measure first. If not, just make sure, weigh first. If not, make sure that you're measuring properly. So we're gonna start with 3 cups of flour. Depending on how you roll them out, this makes anywhere from 12 to 16 tortillas. So 3 cups of flour, a teaspoon and a quarter of salt. I use kosher salt for this, and also a teaspoon and a quarter of baking powder. Literally, I've used this like 3,000 times over the course of my life, and I still don't remember the difference between baking powder and baking soda, but it's the one that doesn't go in your fridge. So, teaspoon and a quarter baking powder. Mix your dry ingredients in. Mix them together. And then for this recipe, you're gonna use a half a cup of some sort of fat. A lot of people use vegetable oil. I've used bacon grease, which is delicious. It definitely adds a lot of bacon flavor. Your tortillas are kind of smoky and bacony. So if that's what you want, that's a good option. My personal favorite for just all-around tortillas is lard. Looks like this. Get it at the grocery store, super cheap. Smells a little bit, but the tortilla comes out perfectly. It doesn't smell like lard at all. So half a cup of that. And then you're gonna take your fat, in this case the lard, and I like to use gloves, just makes this whole process way easier. You're gonna mix it in to your dry ingredients and just kind of work it in for a minute and a half. What we wanna go for is, I'd like to thank Leslie for being my camera girl right now. Okay, so what you want to go for is kind of clumps like this. You don't really want a lot of like fine flour. Work it in so there are no huge chunks of your fat, but you want your dough here to look like just a lot of kind of small to medium-sized clumps. So after the lard or whatever fat you use is mixed in to your dough, then take a cup of hot water. It doesn't need to be boiling, just as hot as you can get it coming out of the faucet. So you dump your cup in, and then knead it, work it around. This process doesn't take too long, about 2 or 3 minutes. It's gonna be really sticky initially. And as I said, the first couple times I did this, it was a little too dry, and so my tortillas kind of cracked and got hard after 2 or 3 minutes after I cooked them. So the consistency you wanna go for here is, you want your dough, obviously all your flour mixed in. You want it to feel a little wet. So you want it to adhere enough that you can use it to kind of collect all the dough off of the sides of the bowl. But when you're done, you want it to feel, probably the best way to describe it is I'm always worried it's a little too wet. So if it stays together well, see, it's not really sticking to my hands, but it still feels nice and wet, like it might almost be a little too wet. I think that's, at least in my very short, very Caucasian experience, has been the best consistency so far. So what we're gonna do now, that the dough's all mixed and kneaded and ready to go, is we're gonna put it back in the bowl, gonna cover it with plastic wrap, and let it sit for about 20 minutes. Thanks. Okay, we've been letting this rest for about 20 minutes. And just so you know, this next little bit is a little bit discretionary. Honestly, you can let it sit for anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour. I haven't noticed that big of a difference. Also, I let it just sit whole, and then I'm going to put it into, kind of break it off into individual size, like the little tortilla balls I'm gonna roll out. So I'm gonna break this into like 16 pieces and then cover it and let it rest for another 20 minutes. Like I said, totally discretionary. You may or may not want to. If you're in a hurry, just cover it with plastic wrap, let it sit for 20 minutes, and then roll the tortillas out and you'll be fine. If you've got a little extra time, I think I prefer it, although I'm probably making it up. I think I prefer to let it rest, put it in the individual balls, let it rest again. Okay, so we've let it rest. And before we get into the rolling and the cooking and everything else, I just want to talk for a hot second about what pans to use. Mexicans use comals. Comal is basically just like a flat cast iron. You can get, here, let me turn this around. Oh, I can't. Okay. Anyway, you can get a Lodge, like 8 to 10 inch cast iron for like 15 bucks off Amazon. Works great. You can also use like a non-stick. It's not as good, but it'll work. My preference, we just happen to have like a Le Creuset enameled flat cast iron, and to me that works the best. I like to cook, so our stove goes up from 5 to 9 to high. I like to cook it like medium high. Get your pan nice and hot. I like to preheat for about 10 minutes to make sure it's evenly heated. Anyway, those are my thoughts on what to cook on and how to cook. Now let's roll and do it. We've let our tortillas rest. Now it's time to roll and cook. We already talked about how I prefer to cook, what I like to cook on. So you want a little flour on your rolling surface, not too much. Also, I've done it with both types of rolling pins. I think this one works the best, unless you get a nice even pressure. A lot of you have asked me about using a tortilla press. They don't really work for flour tortillas. They'll get it round, but they don't get it anywhere near flat enough. So frankly, I think they're kind of pointless for making flour tortillas. So start with your dough ball. Kind of press it between your palms, get it round, put it on your rolling surface. Something I screwed up on initially, the first couple batches I made, I would really press down and elongate on my first roll. And so they were all weirdly misshapen and too thin in some areas, too thick in another. So just more gradual. It also helps you keep it rounder, keeps your shape better. Also helps ensure a more consistent thickness. Some of your tortillas, they might look like Florida, they might look like Texas. It doesn't matter. They're delicious, and you'll eventually get the hang of it. So roll it until it's your desired thickness. I think what's ideal is where they're translucent, thick enough to not fall apart, but you can still see your rolling surface through it. So once you're done, you bring it over to your preheated comal, throw it on. If you want to earn the respect of Mexican abuelas everywhere, you go bare hands on this. They'll think you're a badass. If not, you can use a spatula. No one's going to judge you. I might judge you a little bit. So it's been on for about 10, 15 seconds. You can see it's starting to bubble. So flip. And then I usually flip each tortilla 2 or 3 times. You can see it's starting to puff up. This means that I did a really good job. So I like to kind of twist it, make sure that it cooks without burning in any particular spot. Flip it one more time. And then once I'm done, then I like to use a tortilla holder like this. Get it off Amazon. I like to layer it with a towel put it in there, cover it. If you let your tortillas steam for about 2 to 3 minutes after you cook them, then they'll be softer and more pliable. If you let them steam for too long, they get a little too soft and they lose that nice little bite. Anyway, this is Austin, your Caucasian guide to tortilla making, and let me know if you have any questions.